Foreign Secretary Sir, Shri Vinay Quatra. Also joining us for on the dais, Shri Prabhat Kumar, OSD, ER and DPA, as well as Joint Secretary looking after Public Policy and Research, PPNR, Dr. Sumit Seth. Sir, without further ado, I'll hand over the microphone to you, but just with one comment, but perhaps at the question stage. This is a special briefing on this topic. This is not a press conference in the beginning of the year with Foreign Secretary. So is yours, sir.
That shall come in fullness of time. Okay, thank you very much, Arindam. And very good afternoon to our friends from the media, to this special briefing this afternoon. I think the first one, my first one of the new year. So let me take this opportunity, first of all, to wish each one of you and your families all the very best for the new year. Good health, well-being of the soul to all of you. I'm very happy to announce a new and unique initiative that India will be taking this year. We will be hosting a special virtual summit on 12th and 13th January 2023. That is the next week. This summit, which will be called the Voice of Global South Summit, under the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose, essentially envisages bringing together countries of the global south and share their perspectives and priorities on a common platform across a whole range of issues. More than 120 countries are being invited for this Voice of Global South Summit. This initiative is inspired by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi's vision of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Vishwas or Sabka Prayas, and is also underpinned by India's philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. As you are aware, India has always been in the forefront and consistently championed the cause of the developing world. We have been strongly articulating the interest and concerns of our partners in the global south in all international fora and mechanisms. Now, you're all aware of the recent global developments which have severely impacted the developing world across many domains. Some elements of this impact include: one, of course, the COVID pandemic and the impact that the pandemic has had, a serious impact that the pandemic has had on countries across the world. The impact of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, increasing difficulties of access and affordability of food, fertilizer and fuel, and hence the derivative challenges of food and energy security. Climate change, in particular issues relating to climate finance and climate technology. Increasing burdens on developing countries in the areas like mounting debt, inflationary pressures that are also beginning to take toll on the structural parameters of their economies. Often, however, these concerns of the developing world do not receive due attention and space on the global stage. Often also, the relevant existing platforms have proven to be inadequate in addressing these challenges and concerns of the developing countries. As such, a consultative and outcome-oriented conversation focused on the most pressing concerns, interests, and priorities of the developing countries is the need of the hour. The Voice of Global South Summit is India's endeavor to provide a common platform to deliberate on these concerns, interests, and priorities that affect the developing countries. Also, to exchange ideas and solutions, and most importantly, to unite in voice and purpose in addressing these elements of our concerns and priorities. India will work to ensure that the valuable inputs generated from partner countries in the Voice of Global South Summit deliberations receive due cognizance globally. India's ongoing presidency of the G20 provides us a special and strong opportunity to channelize these inputs into the deliberation and discourse of the G20. While assuming our presidency, you would recall, Prime Minister Modi had said that India's G20 priorities would be shaped in consultation with not just our G20 partners, with whom we, of course, cooperate and consult very closely, but also with our fellow travelers in the global south, whose voice often goes unheard. This summit will thus also be an opportunity for those countries that are not part of the G20 process, especially those countries that are not part of the G20 process, to share their ideas and expectations through this mechanism with the G20. In terms of the broad outline of the program of the summit, which is still in a planning phase and is developing and evolving, the summit envisages 10 sessions over a period of 2 days. As I said, these are still being planned. 2 of these sessions are planned to be held at the levels of the head of the state and head of the government, and 8 sessions will be at the ministerial level. Each session would have a group of a set of 10 to 20 countries participating in each of these sessions. Naturally, as we would expect, the 2 leaders sessions would be hosted by the Prime Minister. The remaining 8 sessions would be led by various ministers with the participation of their counterparts from the invited countries. And as I mentioned in the beginning, more than 120 invitations are being sent across for participation across these 10 sessions. Inaugural leaders session would be in the forenoon of the 12th, and the theme of the discussions in that inaugural session would revolve around Voice of Global South for human-centric development. The finance minister session, which is expected to be one of the ministerial sessions, the discussions in finance minister session would revolve around the theme of financing people-centric development. Given that key element of development has to focus on centricity of people, the theme of this session is being planned and shaped accordingly. The environment minister session, which would be another ministerial session, would focus on the theme on balancing growth with environment friendly lifestyles. You are all aware of the initiative that the Prime Minister launched, which was Lifestyle for Sustainable Environment. The idea is that this session would afford an opportunity for the ministers to focus on sustainable lifestyles that are also green and environment friendly at the same time. The foreign minister sessions, one of the 2 foreign minister sessions, would be on the theme of priorities of the Global South, ensuring a conducive environment. On day 2 of this summit, we would be looking at essentially 5 ministerial sessions and of course the concluding session. Of these 5 ministerial sessions, many would be held in parallel because of the need to factor in the different time zones and also to accommodate widest possible participation in these sessions. So 3 parallel sessions would be in the first half of January 13th. We are still developing the timelines of the program and the specificity. One of them would be the Energy Minister session, which would focus on the theme Energy Security and Development, Roadmap to Prosperity. Then there would be in parallel the Health Minister session, which would focus on the theme and naturally coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic as the world is doing, to focus on cooperation to build resilient healthcare systems. That would be the theme of the Health Minister's session. The Education Minister's session would focus on the theme of human-centric development and capacity building among the countries of the Global South, an element which is a very important element in the development journey of the countries of the Global South. The 2 more parallel sessions which would be held in the second half of day 2 on January 13th. The first of them would be the Commerce and Trade Ministers session, which would be focusing on the theme, broadly speaking, titled Developing Synergies in the Global South, Trade, Technology, Tourism and Resources, an important element of cooperation within among the countries of the Global South. And given the Indian presidency, the ongoing Indian presidency of the G20, the Foreign Minister session on day 2 would focus on the theme G20. I mean, it is as straightforward as it can be. G20 suggestions for India's presidency. We would like to hear from countries that are not members of the G20 to share with us as to what they think in their scheme of things could be included in the discourse within the framework of the G20. The concluding leader session will be hosted by the Prime Minister on the theme which I read out in the beginning itself, which is the unity of voice, unity of purpose. And at the conclusion of the summit, we propose to release a summary of priorities and perspectives, inputs and ideas that the participating leaders and ministers would hopefully share during the summit. Let me stop here with those brief opening remarks with regard to the Voice of Global South Summit proposed for 12th, 13th January, and try and see if how many of your questions I can take and answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. As I said, we'll open the floor for questions. But before that, again, please stick to the topic that is in there. And since I saw you first, I'll start with you. But I'll take the questions. One.
Good afternoon, sir.
Please introduce yourself and the organization.
Happy New Year, sir. सर मैं कविता जोशी हूँ हरिभूमि न्यूज़पेपर से. सर आपने जैसे अभी कहा स्टार्टिंग में अपने ओपनिंग रिमार्क्स में कि ये जो समिट है ये ग्लोबल डेवलपमेंट्स के साए में हो रहा है जिसमें कोविड पेंडेमिक और यूक्रेन क्राइसिस, फूड एंड एनर्जी सिक्योरिटी है. सर इस इशू पे क्या ये जो तमाम इश्यूज हैं और ये जो समिट होने वाला है इसमें 100 से ज़्यादा कंट्रीज आ रहे हैं, क्या चाइना का और यूक्रेन का हमने उनको इनवाइट किया है और उनका किस तरह का पार्टिसिपेशन समिट में रहेगा? सर इसी से जुड़ा हुआ क्या समिट के एंड में कोई जॉइंट डिक्लेरेशन भी मतलब सामने आएगा? थैंक यू सर.
I'll take a few together.
So I'm Siddhant from Beyond. My question is, have we invited all the countries in our neighborhood?
Slowly. Yes, Siddhant.
So have you invited all the countries in our neighborhood, especially countries in our neighborhood who are towards our west?
Like?
Pakistan
Oh, really?
and Afghanistan.
Okay. Okay. Who else had a hand up here? Yashi?
So this is Yeshi Sale from the New Indian Express. I'd like to know how many heads of state are virtually going to take part in this conference, and which are the non-G20 countries who are going to take part?
Sorry?
The non-G20 countries, he said, are also, yeah.
There are, sorry, Yashi, I have to interrupt you on the last question. There are more than 120 invitations which are being sent, or more than 100. There are obviously lots and lots of countries which are non-G20. So I withdraw. I hope you withdraw that question.
So this is the heads
How
of
many
state.
heads of state, or which heads of state you have? Somebody else had a hand up. I'll take one more and we'll come back to it. Sudhi, one second.
Sir, Shudhirajan from the Bloomberg. Here, sir. Any elaboration that you can give us on the summit that the finance minister is holding, and in particular, any discussions that we're doing on debt?
The ministerial.
The ministerial, sir.
Okay.
On debt of, the global south and access to finance.
So I think we'll just take these four and then come around to another set of questions. So basically, sir, if I could summarize for you, Kavita wanted to know about China-Ukraine invite and joint declaration. Siddhant, are all countries in our neighborhood, particularly in the West, invited? Yeshi on how many heads of state, and Sudhi on elaboration on the finance ministers meeting, particularly on debt. So,
I think if I could start with the question that our friend from Bloomberg asked on the what would be the focus priority areas of discussions under the finance minister's track. It's a very common understanding that in terms of the kind of challenges that the developing world today faces, a very large segment of it obviously has a finance dimension to it. So whether it is the very fundamental question of how do you finance your development itself, one, two, in doing so, how do you actually avoid falling in debt trap? Three, again, as part of your financing of development, how do you structure your development aid and development partnerships with your different partners across the world? For any developing society, one of the key parameters is always how do you ensure financial inclusion, which is again a part of putting financing structures of your development space. And of course, increasingly in recent years, and of course going forward in the future also, what is the interface of technology with finance in which it impacts the development, obviously in a positive way. When you talk of technological digital public goods that interface with the world of finance in a manner that actually propels the development of a country. So I would say these would, broadly speaking, as I said, this is still in planning phase. It's being developed. So I'm sure as we go forward, this would assume a much sharper shape in terms of specifics of the topic. But if you were to look at the broad general scope of discussions, we would assume that the finance minister's track would focus, among other things, on these elements of the discussions, which are so very relevant and pertinent for the countries of the global south. In terms of the question from सिद्धांत एंड कविता जोशी जी, एक प्रकार से यदि आपके प्रश्न का भी भाग देखा जाए तो शायद both of them are together and in some ways, and as I've mentioned very early on in my remarks, that invitations are going across to more than 120 countries of the global south. As we go along towards the date of the summit, we would of course be very happy to share with you the list of confirmed participants across various sessions, and that would include sessions relating to the head of the state and head of the government. As I mentioned to you, that each session would have participating countries either as HOS, HOG level or at the ministerial level that would range between 10 and 20.
Joint declaration, you already answered.
Yeah, joint declaration part I already mentioned to you in my remarks, that what we propose to release is a summarized synthesis of the perspectives, the ideas, the inputs, the priorities that the participating countries would share during the summit, and put it out for the benefit of course, all the participating countries, but also for the world outside to know what the thinking during the summit has been of the participating leaders and the ministers. Thank you.
Next, yeah, I'll come to you. Yeah, go ahead. Microphone. One by one.
फॉरेन सेक्रेटरी सर, मैं मधुरेंद्र न्यूज़ नेशन से। अभी आपने एक वर्ड यूज़ किया कि जो डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ हैं वो डेब्ट ट्रैप में ना फंसे। ये एक महत्वपूर्ण विषय है जिस पर बातचीत होगी डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज़ पार्टनर के साथ जिनको इनवाइट किया गया है। मैं जानना चाहूँगा कि क्या हमारा सीधा इशारा चीन की तरफ है, जिसके डेब्ट ट्रैप में फंसकर श्रीलंका जैसा देश जो है वो आर्थिक रूप से बदहाल हो गया, और तमाम कई ऐसे डेवलपिंग देश जो हैं वो भी चीन के डेब्ट ट्रैप में फंसे हुए हैं?
Somebody else? Manish, I'll come to you.
Foreign Secretary Manish Chand, India Rights Network. When we talk about Global South, obviously Africa is a large part of Global South. My question to you is that we are holding the Digital Summit, a very laudable initiative, but we haven't done a summit with African countries since 2015. Can we expect a similar digital summit or something like that in this year? This year being the year of Global
Virtual
South.
summit is what you mean?
Yeah, virtual or physical, ideally physical. But we haven't had time to do that with Africa for many, many years now.
I will happily say that this is beyond the scope of this. So just now, I've taken your question. Let you complete the question.
Two questions which can be answered is about African.
No, that's one thing. Yeah, I will pass that question my way. Sorry, yeah, Nanima, before you, Nanima, go ahead.
Nanima from ABP Live. Sir, I would like to know why suddenly this decision to hold a summit of the G20, I'm sorry, the Global South. Will the inputs go into the final G20 decision? And also, is it because we are the G20 president? Will you continue this once the G20 presidency will be over? Thank you.
Yes, and yeah, I'll come back to that. I saw you.
Tripti Nath, I'm an independent journalist, Foreign Secretary. I would like to know this initiative that you've embarked on inviting non-G20 countries seems to be very meaningful. But would this also pave the way somehow in the course of the year for these non-G20 countries to get a chance to participate because they're giving in their inputs and suggestions?
As you know, our invitation for the G20 summit, if you're talking about, we have already announced who we are inviting for that summit. So unless we have something more to share, I'm not sure if that question is worth, but I'll ask. So just take 4 questions, and then I'll come back another round.
Sure. I think let me just start from the last question that Tripti asked, and as Arindam replied, we have already announced some time ago the countries that are going to be invited to participate in the G20, besides the membership of the G20, and also, which includes, of course, the member countries and the international organizations, both which have traditionally participated and which are being specifically invited for this. So that list is already available in public for us to see. But I think, as I mentioned in my remarks, this Voice of Global South Summit is a great opportunity for us and for the countries of the Global South to make their voice heard through this summit and try and factor that into various deliberations of the G20 summit itself. So in that sense, what they share during the Voice of Global South Summit, both in terms of their interest, their concerns, their priorities, I think would provide a very relevant input and important feed into the discussions of various working groups, ministerial sessions, and eventually, of course, the summit of the G20. As I mentioned, in the G20, we already cooperate and coordinate very closely with the existing members of the G20. So this summit would be, among other things, an opportunity for the non-G20 membership to share their, as I said, perspectives and priorities, which we could try and put forward to the deliberations in the G20. मधुसेंद्र जी, जो आपका प्रश्न ऋण के भार को लेके, डेट ट्रैप को लेके था, जो हमारे ब्लूमबर्ग के मित्र ने प्रश्न पूछा था, उसका मुख्य सार ये था कि वित्त मंत्री के ट्रैक में, अर्थ मंत्रियों के ट्रैक में जो डिस्कशन होगा, उसका क्या मूल स्वरूप होगा, क्या उसका एक प्रकार से प्रकार होगा. तो मैंने कहा था कि विकास की यात्रा में जो एक सबसे मुख्य प्रभावशाली जो एक बिंदु है, वो है कि विकास की फाइनेंसिंग किस प्रकार से की जाए. और ये स्वाभाविक है, कोई भी देश नहीं चाहेगा कि विकास की जब वित्तीय ज़रूरतों की पूर्ति हो तो उससे एक ऋण के भार में वो दबे. किसी भी देश की ये अभिलाषा नहीं होती है. तो ये स्वाभाविक है कि जब निमंत्रित देश जब अपने विकास की यात्रा, विकास के अनुभवों, उनके विकास की क्षमताएं, उनके विकास का क्या परिप्रेक्ष्य है, क्या भविष्य है, देखते हैं, क्या उनके अनुभव रहे हैं, जब वो इन बातों को वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ समिट में उजागर करेंगे, तो ये स्वाभाविक है कि वो उसमें विकास की यात्रा में क्या समस्याएं आती हैं, ऋण भी एक प्रकार से समस्या है, उसका जिक्र भी करेंगे. ये केवल उसी तक सीमित है, इसको किसी देश विशेष के परिप्रेक्ष्य से देखना मेरे हिसाब से उचित नहीं रहेगा. Manish, your question with regard to the Global South Summit and how we have been engaging with Africa. I think you would, if you look at the evidence in terms of how India and the continent of Africa and the countries of Africa have been cooperating both individually and also collectively, that it is a cooperation which is marked with a very robust and development-centric partnership of a kind which is very sustainable and which doesn't, as I just remarked earlier on, leads to the debt trap of those countries. And naturally, India-Africa Forum Summit, to which you alluded to, of 2015, was a significant milestone in the progress of that relationship. And we are confident that that journey that we have historically a very strong journey that we have maintained with the countries of Africa would continue this year also. And naturally, the established mechanism of that partnership with the African countries and with continent as a whole, and that includes India-Africa Forum Summit, would also obviously find a suitable landing as we shape this cooperation through these mechanisms. Yeah. So Nanima, to your question on why this global summit, and I tried to capture it in Prime Minister's quote, which captures one element of it. It doesn't capture the entirety, but it captures that key element that India's presidency of the G20, and I may be missing a word or two here in terms of what Prime Minister mentioned, that our presidency of G20 will be shaped not just in cooperation, consultation with our G20 partners, but also with those countries which are not the members of the G20, but have an ecosystem of concerns and priorities and interests which are extremely crucial for the very success of the G20 in that sense, if it has to really become global in nature. That is the one key element of it, which is one of the pillar thinkings of the summit. But the other element of the Voice of Global South Summit is that if you look at the concerns, interests, and priorities of the large, overwhelming, developing world that is outside the G20, often the evidence would show that the mechanisms, the relevant mechanisms that are supposed to factor them in, take them on board, address them, mitigate those challenges, amplify the opportunities, whether these are both in the multilateral institutional framework or in other plurilateral, select plurilateral mechanisms, those often are found wanting in terms of their abilities, their capacities, or finally in terms of their outcome to be able to meet many of these challenges, concerns, and priorities of this large number of developing countries, which are equally important for the growth of the world. So that was the second pillar thinking. It was very clear, based on evidence, that that voice needs to be heard. That voice needs to be factored in, included in the global discourse across not just G20, but in other intergovernmental international fora also. So the Voice of Global Summit that this initiative is titled as would provide that space and opportunity to bring this voice perspectives and as I said, try and channelize and into the larger international discussions where this could find meaningful reception and a purposeful action on them could be taken.
I'll just take a few more questions. You have one here. Oh, you had also asked whether we are going to continue.
Our perspective, as I said in my remarks also, that we have always been in the forefront and very consistent in championing the cause of the developing countries. This initiative, the Voice of Global South, is a new and unique initiative in that respect. We will have to, of course, see how this initiative evolves in future going forward. But that is something that we would evaluate, analyze, and respond to after the summit is over. But as I said, India would never be found wanting and lacking in terms of coming forward and shaping its response and responding to the needs of the developing countries.
Okay, go ahead. I don't think I'll have time for all
Sir,
that.
Sridhar here from the Asian Age and Technical Chronicle. So India has always maintained that terrorism is an issue that impedes the economic development of any country. So will that be an issue that will be discussed, and will there be any security component during the deliberations, during the two-day summit? And just a small clarification, I just wanted to know whether China, Pakistan and Ukraine invitations have been extended to these three countries.
What, China?
Pakistan and Ukraine.
I think these questions were asked already. Anyway,
Yeah, but I just wanted a clarification on that. Thanks.
सर मैं ब्रह्म प्रकाश हूँ जी न्यूज़ से। मेरा सवाल ये है कि जब ये ग्लोबल आयोजन हो रहा है तो क्या इसमें भारत जो बात करता रहा है कि संयुक्त राष्ट्र में सुधारों की कि भारत को भी परमानेंट मेंबरशिप मिलनी चाहिए, तो उन सुधारों पर भी बात होगी क्या इस ग्लोबल मंच पर? और इसमें क्या सिर्फ डेवलपिंग कंट्री को इनवाइट किया जा रहा है या P5 के नेशन भी होंगे? थैंक यू।
P5, okay. Who had a hand up already? Somebody had a hand up here? No, before, you were much later. No, hold on. Yeah, Kalol, go ahead.
This is Kalol from The Hindu. If I heard it correctly, then the spokesperson said at least I think 120 invites have been sent out. And I think...
more than
120 invites. So around...
More than 120 countries are being invited.
So that's exactly, I think, is the number of countries in the non-aligned movement. And so therefore the question is, if you are really holding a summit about the Global South, then why haven't really shown similar enthusiasm over the non-aligned movement? In fact, the Prime Minister hasn't really attended one summit, I think, the last, as long as I can remember.
Okay. And there was one more question I want to take. No. Okay, so Akhilesh, I'll go now. Look, we can't take all the questions. I know there's a lot of interest.
So I'm Akhilesh Suman from Sansad TV. Actually, I wanted to know that whether this will be part of 200 meetings in the framework of G20.
This is not a G20 event. Let me answer it for you.
Away from that.
Let me answer it right now.
There are some suggestions that voice of African countries are not there in G20. So will you consider that African Union should be involved in G20 like European Union is there?
I will not allow that question. We will take it in our weekly presser on G. This is not a G20 briefing. I'm happy to answer them. Next Thursday, ask me. Sorry, last question here. Please go ahead.
उमाशंकर एनडीटीवी इंडिया से एक सॉवरेन कंट्री के तौर पे इंडिया किसी भी तरह का समिट का आयोजन कर सकता है, लेकिन मेरा सवाल ये है कि क्या क्योंकि ये G20 से लिंक किया जा रहा है इसको, तो क्या G20 के जो मेंबर कंट्रीज़ हैं उनसे किसी तरह का प्रायर कंसल्टेशन किया गया है, और अगर किया गया है तो उनका इसके प्रति रुख क्या रहा है?
Anybody? I'll take one last question on a topic completely different. If it's covered in any of these, I'm not going to take. Something different? Okay, go ahead. No, sir.
ग्लोबल साउथ से जो, मेरा नाम सचिन बुधौलिया है, मैं यूनिवार्ता से हूँ। ग्लोबल साउथ के ज़्यादातर देश जो हैं वो समुद्र तट पर हैं, विशेष रूप से इंडो पैसिफिक क्षेत्र में रहते हैं। तो क्या कोई डेवलपमेंट को लेकर कोई नया इकोनॉमी जैसे ब्लू इकोनॉमी है या इसके ऊपर कोई बात होने वाली है? दूसरा, समुद्र के नीचे जो रिसोर्सेज हैं।
Don't have time. ठीक है, मैं समझ लिया. Sir, I think there are a lot many more questions here, but I think because paucity of time, we'll probably have to close it here.
देखिए, सचिन जी, मैं आपके प्रश्न से प्रारंभ करता हूँ। आपने जो कहा कि G20 के काफ़ी सारे सदस्य,
नहीं, उमाशंकर ने पूछा था, इनका था तो
नहीं, समुद्री तटीय प्रदेश के बारे में आपने कहा ना, काफ़ी जो देश हैं समुद्र तटीय के हैं, तो क्या ब्लू इकोनॉमी के प्रश्नों पर कोई बातचीत होगी? देखिए, मैं आपसे अपनी टिप्पणी में, प्रारंभिक टिप्पणी में कह चुका हूं कि जो मंत्रीय स्तर के जो सेशंस हैं और जो अध्यक्ष, जो राष्ट्राध्यक्ष के स्तर के जो सेशंस हैं, उनके क्या उनके जो शीर्षक होंगे, क्या जो मेन थीम टॉपिक्स होंगे, वो मैं आपको ऑलरेडी उसमें डिफाइन कर चुका हूँ। नेचुरली ये स्वाभाविक है कि जिन जिन देशों की आर्थिक व्यवस्थाओं में जो तटीय देश हैं, तो जो भी ब्लू इकोनॉमी के एलिमेंट्स उनके लिए इम्पॉर्टेंट हैं, तो वो देश ये स्वाभाविक है कि वार्ता के दौरान अपनी बात का जो है उनकी जो आर्थिक विकास में ब्लू इकोनॉमी का जो रोल है, जो उसका प्रभाव है, उसका वो बयान स्वाभाविक है कि वो उसमें करेंगे। उमाशंकर जी, जो आपका ये प्रश्न था कि ये इसको G20 से लिंक किया जा रहा है, मैंने इसको ये नहीं कहा कि ये G20 से लिंक किया जा रहा है। ये मैंने आपको स्पष्ट रूप से कहा कि ये एक नया इनिशिएटिव है वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ का। अब क्योंकि इस वर्ष भारत की अध्यक्षता है G20 की, तो वो एक माध्यम है हमारे पास और ग्लोबल साउथ के देशों के पास, जिसके अंतर्गत हम उनकी विचारधारा को, उनके परिप्रेक्ष्य को, उनके मत को, उनकी इच्छाओं को, उनकी चिंताओं को एक प्रकार से G20 समूह के समक्ष प्रस्तुत कर सकते हैं। जहाँ तक आपको याद हो, मैंने अपनी टिप्पणी में यह भी कहा था, एक प्रश्न के उत्तर में भी पहले कहा था कि हमारा G20 देशों के साथ बहुत ही समीप और एक बहुत ही सकारात्मक सहयोग और सहकार्य अभी से ऑलरेडी चलता है। वो व्यवस्था स्वतः अपनी जगह पे कायम है। ये वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ समिट एक भिन्न इनिशिएटिव है। उसका G20 का लिंक जिस प्रकार से आपके प्रश्न के द्वारा उसमें जोड़ने का जो प्रयास है, मेरे ख्याल से वो उचित शायद इसमें नहीं होगा। Sridhar, your question was on terrorism and development, and whether invites have been issued to specific countries. This question, I think, responds invites to the specific countries. As I mentioned earlier, more than 120 invites are being issued, and we will, as the days progress ahead of the summit, we will be sharing with you the list of confirmed participants as we go along. Terrorism and development. When we invite countries to speak of their interest, their concerns and their priorities, especially as they pertain to their economic growth, development and prosperity, it is for each country to decide as to what for them is a priority, what for them is a concern. Now, depending upon the specific agenda items that would evolve for each of the sessions, each of the ministerial sessions, and for the heads of the state and heads of the government session, many elements, many challenges to development will feature. At this stage, I would not like to confirm inclusion or exclusion, for that matter, of a particular agenda item that needs to be there. To the question from our colleague from the Hindu with regard to the invites, as I said, more than 120 invites are being issued. We will share with you whichever is the final confirmed list of participants. But what we are doing under Voice of Global South Summit has for you to insinuate that in any way means a reduced significance of India's role, active involvement, proactive participation in NAM or even G77 for that matter, I don't think would be correct.
वो G20 क्वेश्चन था, ब्रह्मपुत्र का था UN सिक्योरिटी काउंसिल रिफॉर्म और डेवलपिंग कंट्री को बुला रहे हैं या P5 को बुला भी रहे हैं?
जी, देखिए, ये वॉइस ऑफ ग्लोबल साउथ समिट है। इसमें विकासशील देशों पे केंद्र किया जा रहा है और 120 से ऊपर से ज़्यादा निमंत्रण दिए जा रहे हैं इस समय। अंत में कौन कौन से कंफर्म पार्टिसिपेंट्स होंगे वो हम आपसे बाद में शेयर करेंगे। मगर जो कि आपने ग्लोबल सुधारों की बात की, वैश्विक संस्थाओं की, वैश्विक व्यवस्थाओं की सुधार की बात की, विकासशील देश जब अपने विकास की मुद्दों को लेकर चुनौतियों की को जब परिभाषित करते हैं, तो उसमें अंतर्राष्ट्रीय व्यवस्थाओं और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संस्थानों की भूमिका, उस भूमिका का प्रभुत्व, उसका प्रभाव, ख़ास तौर पे उसकी सफलता या असफलता, वो स्वाभाविक है कि देश यदि उचित समझेंगे, निमंत्रित देश यदि उचित समझेंगे, तो वो उसमें उस पर भी टिप्पणी अगर करना चाहेंगे तो वो उनके ऊपर होगा। मगर जो कि डिफरेंट सेशंस का जो एजेंडा है वो अभी पूरी तरह से फाइनलाइज या विकसित नहीं है। जैसे ही होगा हम वो आपके साथ भी जो है उसको शेयर करेंगे। धन्यवाद।
Thank you, sir. Clearly, there's a lot of interest in this topic, and I'm sure we'll be able to share more in details as we go ahead. For the moment, thank you very much, sir, for the clarifications, the details that you shared. Also, thanks to Shri Prabhat Kumar as well as Dr. Sumit Seth for joining us here. Thank you to all of you. As we mentioned, this is a virtual summit, and we will try to see how we can share the details with you. It is not open to the media, but some elements we'll try to share with you to the extent possible of some of these interventions. We'll see what we'll share with you more details. For the moment, thank you very much. Good evening.
Thank you very much.